So please sit comfortably. I've actually always loved that Teisho begins with this invitation to please sit comfortably. Susan Murphy, my teacher, used to occasionally add, or uncomfortably, if you'd prefer. Which is a cheeky way of actually cutting through both comfort and discomfort. That desire that we can have to be comfortable, as if that came at the expense of uncomfortable. When practice actually is forever revealing that comfort is discovered within discomfort, just like the word itself, there it is, comfort within discomfort. You might even say that practice is all about realising the comfort of no comfort, of mu comfort, picking up on the Teisho that we explored last night, the koan case from Jiaozhou. So really in Zazen we don't pick and choose between these invented states of comfortable or uncomfortable. We just sit. We just commit ourselves to being here no matter what arises. We welcome it directly and we experience it before thought because we actually do. We actually experience what comes in before thought, and we honour this in Zazen as a way of honouring not just this moment but our entire life. But of course all of us know that when we sit in such a way, there are periods where life gets pretty hot. Things start to boil at times. We know this. Sometimes it can arrive almost imperceptibly. It's like the water around us is just slowly heating up and all of a sudden we think, yikes, this is pretty uncomfortable. I'm not sure I like being here where I am right now. At other times it can be, as the old Zen expression has it, like being dropped into a pot of boiling water, or like a crab being dropped into a pot of boiling water. You can imagine all those arms and legs flailing around screaming, "Get me out of here. I don't want to be in this state that I find myself in." I sense that at the moment, even just culturally, we're reckoning with some of this actually on a large scale. It's as if the water has been heating up, literally too, of course. But just our very environment seems to have been changing and warming up, and all of a sudden so many of us are feeling, hang on a minute, this is pretty uncomfortable. I'm not sure that I'm actually, now that I think about it, I'm really sore. I'm actually hurting in this water. And of course then there are all these shocks. We touched on this last night. All of the things that can appear in any ordinary human life, the losses, the disruptions, the unexpected changes, the jolts to our very sense of belonging. So the question at the heart of a practice is, how do we meet such moments? How do we meet even this time that we're in? How do we sit comfortably in our discomfort? And what does this old, enduring Zen tradition have to say about finding ourselves even in boiling water? Well, this is a case that comes from Dogen's collection of 300 cases, and it features old Sao Shan. A monk asked Sao Shan, "The world is so hot, I don't know where to go to escape." Sao Shan said, "Escape into a boiling cauldron, into the coals of a furnace." The monk said, "In a cauldron of boiling water or the coals of a furnace, how does one escape?" Sao Shan said, "The multitude of sufferings cannot reach there." Interesting response. The multitude of sufferings cannot reach there. Now, Cao Shan was a disciple of Dongshan. Cao Shan's dates were 840 to 901 and Dongshan's were 817 to 869. And together they inspired what became known as the Caodong school, better known as Soto, one of the strongest streams, particularly in Japan, but also in the West. Now, Cao Shan, who was the younger, he was the student of Dongshan's, was born on the eve of the Huichang persecution. Perhaps any history buff in this room will be aware of the Huichang persecution. This was a terrible time in 840 to 845, not only for Buddhism in China, but for any kind of spiritual endeavour that was deemed foreign. That included Christianity, Zoroastrianism, all sorts of other things that people were doing. They were deemed to be un-Chinese and therefore unwelcome. And so the emperor at that time set about actually torching temples, dismantling places of practice, making it impossible for anybody to pursue in earnest the spiritual discipline of Chan, of Zen. All of these different kinds of Buddhism were targeted, not only Chan. And it's interesting actually that Chan, of all the schools of Buddhism, was one of the few to actually find a way through this and find a way perhaps to some kind of longevity, the longevity of which we are embodiments of here. So it's hardly surprising that Cao Shan as a teacher would receive monks coming to him in the wake of this extraordinary upheaval in China of that time, asking him about how do I escape from such a burning world, from a world that has been literally torched, but certainly culturally torched, where I and so many people like me have been made to feel intensely unwelcome. And this is a question that perhaps is not so unfamiliar in our time. How do we find our way through or out of or around or underneath or over this burning world, burning in all sorts of shapes and forms? So it's interesting to me that at that time, teachers and students alike were forced to look a little bit deeper into the Dharma. That cloistered setting of the temple or the monastery was not available to many. And so deeper insight was demanded of them. What is it to live in a burning world? Where can I go in a burning world if all of the infrastructure that usually provided refuge is just not available, just not accessible? So they had to ask these questions. They had to ask a question like, how do I escape? How do I escape this boiling cauldron? You might even say, how do I escape hell itself? Because it would have been like hell at that time. Well, staying with hell just for a moment. Buddhism loves hells, you might have noticed. There are so many of them. If you actually begin to have a look at all the different expressions of hell, they're pretty wonderful. And it's funny, isn't it? We laugh, but we all love hells. We all love the kind of diabolical things. I'm always amused that people set out in all earnest to read Dante's Divine Comedy, and they love the Inferno, but then they get a bit tired walking up Purgatory, and then they rarely ever read the Paradiso. All that lovey-dovey ethereal stuff, it's just boring, isn't it? Hell's where it's at. Hell's where the good stories are. So I could go on and on and on about the Buddhist hells, but I'll just give you a couple of examples. Just the names of them are enough. They're wonderful. There's hunger, there's thirst, then there's boiling excrement. There's 500 nails, pus and blood, measuring fire, axes and hatchets, jackals and wolves, sword cuts, black sand, cold and ice, It said that any person finding themselves embroiled or caught up in one of these hells, and there are images of these hells, they're actually images of a whole bunch of demons stomping somebody into a cauldron, in fact. Actually just pressing them down with their feet. And at such a time it's said that people would cry out, "There is nothing but flames." They fill the sky and there is no space between the flames. In the four directions, in the four intermediate directions, and on the ground, there is no place which is free of flames. Every place on the ground is filled with evil people. I can't rely on anything. I am alone, with no companion. I am within the darkness of this evil realm and will soon enter the mass of flames. In the sky, I can see neither the sun, the moon, nor the stars. Now, who wouldn't want to get out of that? And how moving, how poignant that in this cry, this person cannot see the sun, the moon, or the stars. It's like missing the exquisite beauty of this natural world, being somehow blinded to it, almost wrested away from it, stolen from it in some way. So this monk wants to escape exactly this kind of place. But where can he go? Where can he escape to? This is his earnest cry to his teacher at this time. And that's when Saoshan responds, escape into the boiling cauldron, into the coals of a furnace. Now this, on the face of it, doesn't sound like much of an escape, does it? It sounds like almost doubling down into this hell realm. The monk certainly doesn't think so on first pass, which is why he presses Saoshan further, and I'm glad he does. He presses Saoshan further about how this could be possible, how there could be any kind of refuge in the boiling cauldron itself. And that's where Saoshan says, the multitude of sufferings cannot reach there. What's he pointing to? What's he actually inviting us to see here? The multitude of sufferings cannot reach there. Perhaps you can intuit that he's pointing to this no place of the Dharma, the very bed of emptiness itself, the ground of our being, you might say. This place that the multitude of sufferings cannot reach is Mu, is this no thing at all, this no thing that all of us share. It is our intrinsic and essential nature. And it is a place that we can touch. We're touching it all the time. We're touching it in every move that we make, in fact. But are we alive to this fact? And can we be alive to it when the going gets really tough? Now, we know about this, I'm sure, from our own experience. Whenever we're sitting in Zazen and you actually do get a wave or a surge or a powerful thrust of this discomfort, it's easy to learn, and we are quick to learn, that trying to avoid it or evade it only makes it worse. I'm sure we've all experienced this. You try to turn away from it or shut it off, and it just gets louder. It just gets more painful. We just become more anguished in that setting. So perhaps this invitation or challenge of Saoshan's is to not avoid, is actually to turn towards, to be brave enough and prepared enough and open enough and supple enough to experience the very true nature of these flames. Now, this is a hard sell, of course, for people. Nobody really wants to hear this particularly. And I was curious to read that Suzuki Roshi in America found it very, very difficult to get this message across. You can imagine actually that in America, of all places, this would be a very, very difficult message to get across. And there's one student in particular in the Sangha there with Suzuki Roshi that began to get on Suzuki's nerves a little bit. He was somebody that would participate in the rituals and he would eat the food. In fact, he'd eat a lot of food when they were eating food. And then it was noticed that in his dormitory he had a really big, large stash of lollies that he felt that he needed just to get him through between meals. And then he'd come back to the dojo on a cold morning and he didn't just have thermals on and he didn't just have a jumper on, but he had a giant puffer jacket under his robes. So he'd move in as this kind of almost sleeping bag looking figure, into the dojo. And Suzuki, watching this, tolerated it for a time and then I imagine just thought, this poor student, he's going to miss this. He's going to miss something important here. So he actually brought it up. He brought it up with the student in the context of Dharma inquiry with everybody else. And the student, once being told that he didn't actually need to wear so much clothing or eat all of those lollies. In fact, he could let all of that go and simply just be with the cold, be with the heat, be with life as it is, be with his own discomfort, in fact. Well, the student shot back saying that, isn't this supposed to be the middle way? This isn't some sort of indulgence in austerities, is it? And that's when Suzuki replied, almost sort of erupted in a very compassionate way. He said, you say you want the truth. None of you want the truth. If I told you the truth, I'd be left sitting here alone listening to the sounds of your cars driving up the road. Then he sat silently for a while. He sighed, and then he said this, I understand you. You think that pain is bad, that suffering is bad. You think that our way is to go beyond suffering, but there is no end to suffering. When I was young, I felt very bad for all the suffering people have. But now I don't feel so bad. Now I see suffering as inescapable. Now I see suffering as beautiful. You must suffer more. Now, like Saoshan, Suzuki here is completely upending our habitual relationship to suffering. He's actually saying something like, suffering is not to be escaped, but it is to be actualized. And when actualized, the multitude of sufferings cannot reach there. If you truly embody your suffering and pain, you can find that quiet place, that quiet centre, which cannot even be touched by the most desperate pain. Now, last Sunday I shared a story with the online group that are taking part in the gathering, which actually has resonance here in the context of this case. It's a story about a referral I got when I was at work, a referral to a woman who was in the acute ward of the hospital. She was in extreme pain. She had heart failure and a range of other comorbidities, one of those lists of ailments that is just so detailed as to be unfathomable. When I arrived, she was in one of those shared spaces like it often is in acute. She had her curtain drawn all the way around and all the lights were off. She looked asleep, so I entered that sphere of where she was, looked at her, couldn't see whether she was responsive or not, but something told me to stay, so I said, hello, my name's Kynan. I'm the pastoral care coordinator here at the hospital. I'm just going to sit with you for a while. I'm just going to be with you. And so that's what I did. I just pulled up a chair and sat next to her, expecting nothing, sitting in a kind of quiet zazen with her. And a good almost 10, 15 minutes must have passed, actually, just sitting there with her in that silence, when out of nowhere I just heard this voice that said, "Could you please hold my hand?" And so this hand was offered from under the bed sheets, and I took her hand, and we sat there just holding hands, just silently holding hands for another 10, 15 minutes. And it was then that, again, from seemingly nowhere, this voice reappeared, and she said, "Thank you. I just had to get to the centre of my pain. When I get to the centre, there is no pain. Now I can talk. Let me tell you what's been happening." And off she went. And we spoke for another timeless time, must have been 20 minutes, half an hour. I say we spoke, but she just let it all flow out. She just let everything that was her life and her queries and her feelings, it all just flowed out unhindered. She was speaking from inside her history, inside her family, inside her hopes, inside her fears. She wasn't trying to escape. And by not escaping, she could rest in the whole of it. Now, I left that encounter when it finally came time to leave, feeling deeply stabilised myself, stabilised in her practice. We'd held hands throughout, but I don't think that she would even recognise me if she saw me on the street. Perhaps she might recognise my voice, but I really didn't say very much. She was the one who did the speaking. But it was so clear that we'd shared something deeper than all of the ordinary social cues. We had been sitting together in the boiling cauldron, in the very heart of the flames, at peace. There's an old Zen saying in the Shodoka that says, "The lotus exists in the midst of fire." That's where we find it. That's where the lotus lives, right in the flames, no matter how hot or cold they may be. The lotus, of course, is an emblem of Buddhism, of clear, bright, luminous Buddha nature. We revere the image because water, as we know, just glides off. It just beads off the lotus, leaving no trace whatsoever. The lotus, therefore, untouched even by water. But Sao Shan is inviting us to see that this is true of flames as well. It's true of all states. Yongjia in the Shodoka goes on to say that this lotus is never destroyed. The lotus exists in the midst of fire. It is never destroyed. We can't lose this. We can never lose access to this lotus. It is what we are at heart. We are all this lotus. So, this is why we practice, to actually draw closer, to become intimate with this lotus, with this no thing, to this place that sufferings, the myriad sufferings of the world cannot reach. And there's another case that actually touches on this, that goes like this. This is actually with Sao Shan's teacher, Dongshan. Perhaps this is where Sao Shan actually developed some of his own responsiveness here to this other monk. Dongshan was asked by a monk, "When cold and heat come, how can they be avoided?" Dongshan said, "Why don't you go to the place where there is neither heat nor cold?" The monk asked, "Where is the place?" where there is neither heat nor cold. Dongchan said, when it is hot, be hot Buddha. When it is cold, be cold Buddha. In some translations, this is given as when it's hot, kill yourself with heat. When it's cold, kill yourself with cold. This is important. It actually draws us in closer to the way the self that we make up gets to die when we truly meet our circumstances. It doesn't get in the way anymore. We can be clean with circumstances then. But I like this other translation which comes from Dogen because it extends to everything we do. When turbulent, we can be turbulent Buddha. When still, still Buddha. When sad, we can be sad Buddha. And when joyous, we can be joyous Buddha. Because Buddha doesn't pick and choose. Buddha is at rest even in the most anguished times. And I'm reminded actually of the transition between the Ming and Qing dynasty. This was another time in China. China's had its fair share of upheavals. Anybody who's read the history know. But this transition from the Ming and Qing was another very trying period for Buddhism in China. So much so that once again the monks and nuns had to look deeper into the Dharma, had to explore how they could find refuge when no other structural refuge was at hand. And I'm interested in this period because there was a new appreciation of what they called genuine anguish. Genuine anguish, a celebration of genuine anguish. And they turned not to traditional Buddhist sources to actually feel their way into this. They actually found themselves celebrating secular poetry. Poetry that was plain and direct and heartfelt and honest in ways that it almost broke down the walls of any kind of monastery setting. It was vivid and real and unpretentious. And so in that spirit, I want to share with you a poem by Tony Hoagland called Why I Like the Hospital. As an example of this genuine anguish poetry. So why I like the hospital? Because it's all right to be in a bad mood there. Slouching along through the underground garage, riding wordlessly on the elevator with the other customers, staring at the closed beige doors like a prison wall. I like the hospital for the way it grants permission for pathos. The mother with cancer deciding how to tell her kids. The bald girl gazing downward at the shunt installed above her missing breast. The crone in her pyjamas walking with an IV pole. I don't like the smell of antiseptic, or the air conditioning set on high all night, or the fresh flowers tossed into the wastebasket. But I like the way some people on their plastic chairs break out a notebook and invent a complex scoring system to tally up their days on Earth. The column on the left that says, times I acted like a fool, facing the column on the right that says, times I acted like a saint. I like the long prairie of the waiting, the forced intimacy of the self with the self. Each sick person standing in the middle of a field, like a tree wondering what happened to the forest. And once I saw a man in a lime green dressing gown, hunched over in a chair, a man who was not yelling at the doctors or pretending to be strong or making a murmured phone call to his wife, but one sobbing without shame, pumping it all out from the bottom of the self, the overflowing bilge of helplessness and rage, a man no longer expecting to be saved, But if you looked, you could see that he was holding his own hand in sympathy, listening to every single word, and he was telling himself everything. Now, what is Zazen if not the capacity to tell ourselves everything, not in words, silently, but to allow all of this to come forth exactly as it is? This telling is a way of being genuinely present to life, genuinely here. Not here in some kind of dressed up sense, but in the most ordinary human sense, the only sense that matters, ultimately. And when we can tell ourselves everything, hear our own great cries, which are, of course, the cries of the world. How can they not be the cries of the great shared world that we are in? When we are able to stay in this, we are actually embodying what's called a body mandala. A body mandala. It translates literally as a circle of awakening, which is perhaps another way of describing this boiling cauldron. It's a circle of awakening. We sit in Zazen as a circle of awakening. Even our very mudra itself, when we sit like this great circle that we make possible. There's even another circle in here. This is a body mandala. And it's where all of our joys and sorrows, all of our griefs and loves, all of our tears and laughter, all of the pleasure and pain can be experienced. And when we're brimming with this everything, not picking and choosing between states, not even trying to distinguish between tears and laughter, they so often appear together. They are one great stream. When we allow ourselves to be brimming in just this kind of way, we discover not simply that we're okay, that this lotus at the core of our being is okay, but we learn and realise that we are sitting with all of our ancestors, all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the past, who, without trying to sit comfortably or uncomfortably, are at rest in this place where the multitude of sufferings cannot reach. So thank you for your trouble.